Thank you for choosing to join me with this little saga sew-along that I'm doing. I'm going to be working on the Saga We Care gown that's designed by Nancy Newell. It's available for Saga members on the Saga website, and it is the very first one that is shown with a little pink gown on the front. So if you haven't already done so, download that pattern and print it, because that's what we'll be using to make the gown that we plan to do. I'm going to show you how to do a contrast border that's very pretty. It can be used for boys and for girls, and it's a nice way to add some contrast to the bottom of the gown without adding any expense to the construction of the gown. You're going to need all the usual supplies that are listed on the pattern. I would recommend that you use something like Imperial Batiste or a generic Batiste to make the gown. The lightweight fabrics work best. And then you'll need about 12 inches of a contrast fabric, and I would use the same fabric for the contrast as you're using for the gown. So if you choose to use broadcloth for the gown, then choose a broadcloth or broadcloth weight fabric for the contrast border. And your contrast border can be a solid, it can be a gingham or a print, whatever you choose to put on there. The ones that I have to show will have a solid border, but it does look pretty with print borders as well. Some of the additional supplies that you're going to need to create the contrast border, I use freezer paper. You can also use parchment paper, or even if you've got a roll of wrapping paper, you're going to need some type of paper to design your border, and you're going to need a length of anywhere from 36 to 42 inches, so a long length. Freezer paper works great because you can also iron it onto the fabric when you get ready to trace. Then you're going to need your lightweight sewing thread. I use the Mettler 60 weight thread. Your regular all-purpose sewing thread is really too heavy for the techniques that we'll be using. In addition, I will be at some point showing you how I pin stitch the hem on. And so if you have a machine that has a pin stitch, I highly recommend an 80 weight thread for pin stitching, and I use the Madeira Cotona thread for that. If you're going to pin stitch, you're also going to need a heavier needle. So 100, a 110, or a 120 needle for the pin stitching works very well. You will need your paper scissors for cutting out our border design when we make it. And of course, with your lightweight thread, you're going to need your lightweight sewing needle. So I would recommend a size 65 or 70, and it can be a universal or a microtex. Either one of those work. The microtex needle has a sharper point, so if you need to get needles, if you don't have the correct size for the lightweight thread, I would recommend getting the microtex as opposed to the universal. But if you have some universal on hand, use those. They work well. You're also going to need a water-soluble thread, and I use the Vanish Extra. I know that there are other brands out there, so whatever brand you can get a hold of will work very well for this, but you do need to have a water-soluble thread. For the pin stitch, I also use a water-soluble stabilizer, and mine is the Solvy Soluweb, I believe it's called. I'll look that up and put a link down below for this. Other brands make it. It's a Vilene wash away, whatever type wash away stabilizer, but you want the type that looks like interfacing and not the type that looks like saran wrap. I don't get the good results from the saran wrap type wash away stabilizers that I do from this more fabric type stabilizer. And in addition to that, these are some little extras. I have these long tweezers that I don't know if they came with my embroidery machine or my serger, but the long tweezers are going to be really helpful for turning your border right side out, and some sort of point pusher tool. I prefer to use something that doesn't have a sharp point that's going to pierce through the fabric, so I like this with a little tiny ball point. And then of course you're going to need a press cloth, and mine is a handkerchief linen press cloth. This was gifted to me when I taught for the Midnight Oil Smockers, and it has been wonderful. But any type of handkerchief, you can cut a handkerchief linen square. You'll want something heavier than organza because that won't hold water well enough for the technique that we're going to use, and a ruler is helpful. So gather up all your supplies and you can get your gown cut out. I use the gown pattern as the one piece, and I will go into that in my pleating video. So stay tuned and get ready to make a gown. And just on a side note, the contrast border that we're going to be making is very easy, but it makes enough to make 2 dresses or 2 gowns. So you might want to plan to cut out 2 gowns so that you can have twice the fun. I'll see you in the next lesson. Be sure to hit the like button below and subscribe to my channel so that you will be notified when the next video will post with our next lesson.